Welcome back to the process. Only have a handful of things to get done before we can get this new engine fired up, or at least new to me engine fired up. So I think we're gonna probably try and get it started in this video, unless I really get distracted or down in the weeds on something, or just discover that I'm much further behind than I thought it was. But the list of things to get it started isn't too terribly long. This video will probably take a little bit longer to come out. I've got some family stuff going on. I had an uncle pass away just a couple of days ago, and I've got to head out of town to go to that funeral. I wasn't super close to him, but I knew him well enough. He was my uncle, so I might do a little bit of talking about that while I work in the video. So hopefully you don't mind hearing about a little bit of personal stuff while I work on the car. Let's get to work. All right, this throttle cable that's in here, which is actually belongs to an F body of the same year, not to the Corvette, is too short, so I picked up a universal cable. I'm going to start by removing this bracket here and then taking a look at what I need to do on a bracket here. So we'll see how things progress. Okay, you just saw me pull this bracket off the car. This, the F body cable that I mentioned was a little too long, and so I whipped up this really crude bracket to put the accelerator pedal at the right spot. So went ahead and pulled the pedal out. This is the original termination that would have been on the Corvette or the F body, and it kind of notches into this hole on the accelerator pedal. And then this universal cable has this, I don't know what this is called, but this kind of pin style. So I think what I need to do after looking this for a couple minutes is get a bolt and put it in here, but then drill a hole through the bolt that this pin that's in this fixture, whatever this is called, that little pin can go through the bolt and sit something like that. And then I'll be able to attach this and retain this in case I ever want. I mean, if I ever need to replace this accelerator pedal, I can get one out of a Corvette, and this this throttle cable will be able to attach directly to a different accelerator pedal. So that's what I'm going to work on. We've got good clearance now on this. You can't really see in there, but that bracket's not hitting that little attachment point's not hitting the firewall, so that's good. I think before I move on to the throttle body, I am going to cut a little plate to go here and attach that here, so we can go ahead and get this attached to the firewall, and then we'll worry about that side. Next, we're going to work on this throttle cable bracket. So I've already got it done over at the firewall over there, which is a little out of frame. And then this cable comes over and needs to mount to a bracket here before going around this cam. So I've got one threaded boss here in this LT2 intake, and this one, there might be a way to put an insert in here, but I found that the head of this bolt is like perfect. Like there's like almost no play in here. So I am going to drill a hole, put this bolt through here, and weld it so that it sits flush like that. And then there will be a second hole drilled, and then this will hold it in place from twisting. This bolt will be held in, and then I need to weld a bracket coming off this way with a hole in it so that this can go through a plate here. Hopefully I'm explaining all that, but we'll fashion up this bracket, and then the throttle cable will be ready to go on. And like that, I have a shifter cable. I've already gotten in the car and played with the gas pedal, so everything feels just about right there. I will pull this off and paint it later so it doesn't rust up, but for the moment I need to run to a kid's track meet and then hopefully get back to work a little more later today. These are OEM triple Y headers, I believe off the Camaro and the Corvette. The LT1, I don't see a reason why these won't work. So we'll get these shorties thrown on, and we can start to wrap a few things around them, such as oiler cooler lines that I was hesitant to do before I knew exactly where the headers were going to be. So as you saw, the passenger side went on pretty easy, which is a relief because that was the side I was having trouble with. Now I'm having a little trouble with the driver's side. Not too much though. This will be an easy fix. So it's mostly on enough for mock-up anyway, but we are having a slight clearance issue. I'll try and point it out with this screwdriver. So there are two mounting points for the lower shield. The heat shielding on these headers is a two-part, an upper and a lower. And so the lower shield has two mounting points on the back of this header. One right here, I'm touching it with the end of the screwdriver, and then one right down here. And maybe you can see that, but it's just barely hitting this fiberglass firewall and causing just a little bit of bind. I could probably really get it in there without much of an issue, but the heat shield is not going to fit on anyway because the heat shield actually adds more thickness, so I can't put the lower heat shield on this header. So I'm just going to eventually cut off this lower mounting point off the exhaust just so I have more clearance. And I have a header heat wrap anyway, so I'm just going to wrap the whole header and heat wrap and probably not worry about the shielding. I may put on the upper shielding because I think it'll fit just fine and it'll keep it away from these brake lines here a little bit better. So, but for now, it's on enough for me to mock up the oil cooler lines, which kind of go right underneath that header. So we'll probably get to that next. Okay, actually before I get started on the oil cooler, I'm gonna look at maybe raising this motor up. It is on the lowest setting of these mounts, and I think it go up another 1/2 to 3/4 inch, something like that. So, and I mostly am curious. Yeah. This oil pan is sitting about 1.5 inches below the frame rail here. Let's check it against. It actually is about level with the floor pan. let's see up here, if you're, you know, I don't know how this orientation front to back, the tilt of the motor is without the transmission in, so assuming it's level or it's in its final resting spot, which again, I don't know that it is. It looks like it's maybe 3/4 of an inch lower than the front here. Yeah. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and put all the spacers back in underneath these motor mounts and lift the motor up another 3/4 of an inch. I think that'll be safer to protect this from hitting anything while I'm driving, and may give me a little extra clearance, though it's not going to matter too much on the clearance here as I run the oil cooler lines out of this guy right here. So that's what we'll do. Okay, motor is sitting up a little bit higher. There's a couple of side effects. One, I get a little more clearance right here on this air filter. Wasn't a big deal, but I like where it's sitting a little bit better now with the clearance on the radiator. I, maybe you saw in a previous video, had to raise this up a little bit to clear the top of the K-member, the upper control arm mount. I might not have had to do that if this had been up higher to begin with, and the same on the other side. I definitely wouldn't have had to clearance this as much as I did, but that's all right. We should have more room for exhaust activities down around the transmission tunnel with the engine being up a little bit higher. I am going to have to relocate this just a little bit, so raising it causes a clearance issue right here on the back of this intake. So this intake is not seated down properly right here. So that's gonna maybe move over an inch or so. I don't have to move it much, I just need to move it just a little bit so that it clears back there, because it's just barely touching. So we'll get to work on that, and then maybe on this side we'll finish up the alternator wiring and check that off the list. While I work on this, figured I'd talk a little bit and tell a little story. I mentioned that my uncle passed a couple days ago, and you know, just being out here in the garage, and it's good thinking time. Good time to work with your hands and let your mind contemplate things. And you know, passing of someone you know or love is always makes me think a little bit. And I was thinking about a little story. I'm a businessman by profession. I work on cars for fun, but to pay the bills, I work in the business arena. and I steward a small business. But let me tell you a little story. Once was a businessman, and he was an excellent businessman. His employees really loved him. He treated them well. He made sure that he provided excellent wages, and when employees went through hard times, he was there for them. In one instance, there was a man who, in the business, who struggled with an addiction to alcohol. He made sure that the man got the help he needed, and while he had to fire him at the time because of some issues that he was creating in the business, after his recovery and return to a decent life, he rehired the man. The man was happy to come back to work for him because he knew he'd be treated well. In another instance, there was a family, couple small kids, husband and wife who fell on hard times, and they lost their house. And so he had a couple extra rooms in his house, and he invited them to stay with him for a few months, helped them with some financial planning, helped them get back on their feet, and did it all free of charge because he was a good boss and a good leader. But he made a mistake. He fell behind in his taxes. The records aren't clear whether or not it was his fault directly, but when you fall behind on your taxes, the government wants their payments. So he was taken to court, and before a judge, he was found guilty. And he certainly had testimony in court from his side, from his employees testifying on what a good boss he was and what a good leader he was and how upstanding of a man he was and what a good citizen he was. But when it came time for the verdict, the judge had to look at it and say, well, you broke the law. You didn't pay your taxes. And his tax bill was more money than he had. And so his choices were to pay the fine, which he couldn't afford, or to go to jail. And so as much as he pleaded that he was a good man, as much as the people who testified on his behalf pleaded that he was a good man, that he had always been good to his employees, he had helped an employee through his struggle with alcohol and helped a family when they needed housing, none of that mattered, because ultimately he had broke the law in one key area. He had failed to pay his taxes. And so the judge, being a just judge, had to rule against him, because that is what a judge who is just would have to do. It doesn't matter the other excellent things that he had done in his life, he still broke the law. And then a friend of his came into the courtroom, and he brought a bank check with him that would pay the fine. And he brought it in and handed it to the judge, and the judge had to look at it and say, Mr. Businessman, your debt has been paid and you're free to go. And the reason I'm telling that story is because it relates to us in eternity. It doesn't matter how good of a life you live. The Bible tells us that all men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And just one sin is deserving of separation from God. We would call that hell. So when we die, we all deserve to go to hell because we've broken God's law, and He's a just judge, and it doesn't matter the other things that we've done excellent in life. As a just judge, He has to acknowledge that the law was broken and the law deserves a punishment. The law requires a payment for what was transgressed or broken. And so this is where Jesus comes into the story. He came and He lived a sinless life on this earth, and He did not deserve death as we do. And yet He took our place on the cross. He willingly became a sacrifice, took sin upon Himself, and took our punishment for us, just as the friend of the businessman did. He took our punishment on the cross. Even though He did not deserve death, He died in our place. So I'm just thinking about eternity a little bit today, and kind of remembering that little story, fictional though it may be. There's probably real stories similar to it here in this country, but it's a reminder that we can all live good lives, but if we don't choose to follow Jesus, acknowledge Him as our Savior and His sacrifice for us, then we're not going to be able to spend eternity in heaven with God. So, just something to think about. Thanks for listening to me a little bit while I work and think about things out here in the garage. Okay, I had a little fun with my 3D printer. I haven't had it for too long, and I'm just learning a little bit about how to use it, but a simple circle and a simple little piece here weren't terribly difficult to design up. So this will, talked previously in another video about filling this cap, so it's just nice and snug in there, and it's nice and flush. And then I picked up a couple of C4 stickers, since this started life as a C4, so I think I'm gonna throw that in there once I get this all set. I'm just gonna epoxy this in. There's really nothing I need to get to back here, and if I ever need to, I guess I'll throw some heat on it and pull the epoxy out. It should come off anyway. If I have to unbolt these 6 bolts, I can get in there. So I'm gonna epoxy that in, and then my headlight switch here has some play in it. So I made this little spacer to be able to fit in behind here, and it's the right shape, so that'll take up that play. I'll probably go ahead and epoxy this in place too. So I'm gonna get that done. Like that, we've got an alternator wired up. I've got it down to a fuse just beyond the alternator, and then into the terminal block in there, and then I go ahead and throw that cover on the terminal block since I don't need it anymore. We're about ready to throw some covers on these fuse panels, but I'm gonna leave them off for the moment till I get everything tested out. And I did just test the electric water pump, and that cooling system's all sealed up and flowing and full, just distilled water at the moment. So let's see what's next. All right. I have the shielding on. I went ahead and threw the spark plugs in, torqued the headers down to the proper torque and the spark plugs, and threw wires and ignition coils on because I need to figure out how I'm going to mount these. So I think what I'm going to do, I might not build these tonight. I might look around on the internet for some other ideas, but I think what I'm going to do is build a bracket coming up off the frame and mount these four kind of like this in a row. So I think that's what I'm going to do. The other side, there's a little more going on down in this area. I think I can get them to fit, but there's a steering column and things like that in the way. So I think I can work around that and get a similar look on the driver's side. Like that, I've got a bracket whipped up for the coils. Just use some inch flat stock, some 1/2 inch aluminum tube, cut it down to the right length for spacers, some all thread and some washers, and I'll throw some nuts on the end here and it should be good, ready to go. It'll get bolted to or screwed into the top of the frame rail that is right there ready to accept this. So that's how it'll get attached. So I'm gonna go ahead and make another one for the driver's side, paint them up and throw them in. And like that, the paint is dried and the bracket is complete. They're all wired in here. So we'll move on to the next thing. We are gonna get started on the Holley Terminator X install. I'm going to start with the two boxes that need to get mounted. This is the main controller, and I am planning on mounting that right up in here. And then this is the GDI controller. So Gen 5 LT motors, direct and injected, and they need this special controller. This is a metal case and it's far heavier than the Terminator X, and actually a little bit bigger too. So I am planning on mounting that down here, and then there's a series of LEDs on the front of this as well as the front of this, and I should be able to see both. Not that they're all that important from what I understand, but I should be able to see both. I have these rubber bushings that will get mounted, so I'm going to use some rib nuts, screw these into the frame, or into the car here, and then screw the controllers into these. So let's get started. got most of the way in, but the bolts that I have, or screws that I have, they're long enough. The head is too big to actually fit in the hole made for it here. And I just in my stash of screws can't find one that's gonna fit, so we'll have to not mount this all the way, but it's pretty much ready to be mounted. And it's getting late here, so it's time for me to call it quits for the evening and pick it up back up tomorrow. All right, I've got the header wrapped. It may be difficult to see, but got some exhaust wrap on the bottom of that header, and it's all torqued down. Got the heat shield on the top on, so that allowed me to put all the spark plugs, ignition coils, I'll call that up. And as I was wiring up the Holley system, I discovered a slight problem. I am missing the wire harness for the injectors, so I gotta find that and get that here. Otherwise, almost everything is wired up on the injectors. There is a slight problem with one of the harnesses, so Holley has to send me a new wire harness to replace the GDI, the main harness for the GDI system. Under here, I've also got, ignore that there, the oil accumulator and coolant system all plumbed up. So I've got the improved motorsports block on the oil pan, and then if I swing around here, if I can get the angle, there's the T where everything comes together with a one-way check valve. And then coming up front, let's see if this is light. I've got a Mishimoto oil cooler in front of the power steering cooler. So that's all plumbed in, and the oil system should be pretty much ready to fill with oil. I think I need to throw a dipstick in, and then the oil system will be sealed up and I can throw some oil in there. Well, you win some and you lose some. And in this case, I lost a little more than normal with my uncle passing last week. Thanks for bearing with me while I process through that a little bit on video. Appreciate you watching. I also lost a smaller battle on this, in that I am still waiting on a wire harness from Holley. Like I said earlier, they shipped me the wrong one, and I'm waiting for the replacement, and I really don't want to wait any longer to get this video out. It's already getting long enough. Did a number of other things while I waited, so this one should be reasonably lengthy, and hopefully that wire harness shows up in the next week or so. That is about all I have left to get this thing ready to start. I discovered a knock sensor that's missing on the passenger side, so I'm waiting on that to come in, and then I should be able to pretty much plug everything up. I need to figure out the coolant temp sensor. I've got a solution, I think, waiting on a part for that, so I'll need to finish that up and finish mounting the 7-inch Holley EFI dash, and then run power for the Holley Terminator X. But there really isn't a whole lot left to do once I get that wire harness. So my goal was to get this thing started in this video, but delays being what they are, it's not going to happen. So on the next video, we should get this thing started. So thank you guys for watching along, and I'll see you on the next one.